Good afternoon to everyone in South Africa, and good morning, good day to everyone in the other parts of the world, including the USA. My role today is just to introduce the people who are most familiar to Siyaphumelela, who will welcome everyone who attending this session. Firstly, on the panel, I have Glennie, an education activist who dedicated her time advancing policies and practice that enable meaningful access to quality education. Jenny is the founding director for SEDI, founding president of Nadiosa, and chair of the founding council for Solblaki University. Amongst other things, Jenny contributed to CHE, Higher Education Quality Council, and Council of the new UNISA. Among Jenny's innovations is the Study of Education series, OER Africa, Peace and African Story. So Jenny would come, and then after that, then Jenny will take over and introduce other speakers. But the second person that is going to welcome us is none other than Bill Moses, who's managing director for the Kresge Foundation Education Program. We know him, the role that he's playing in terms of access and student success, as well as part of the Siyaphumelela. Bill is not new to South Africa. He first came as a student and worked in South Africa as an investor responsibility for research center. He has authored a number of books focusing on Africa, Guide to American State on Local Laws on South Africa, Corporate Social Responsibility in the Changing South Africa. Amongst others, he serves as co-chair of Partnership Higher Education in Africa, co-founder of Africa Grant Makers Affiliation Group, and serves on the boards of Detroit College Access Network, Appias and College Promise. So these are the two people that will welcome us to Siyaphumelela. And over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Takalani. And for those of you who are not familiar with Takalani, he's our new coordinator of the Siyaphumelela network, joined us in November under COVID. So welcome back to you, Takalani, to the Siyaphumelela family. So welcome. Who would have thought when we launched Siyaphumelela 2 in August last year that 10 months later, we would be locked down for the third and rather nasty wave. So as New York removes restrictions, our hospitals are overflowing. A new world economic divide is upon us. We are all drawing on reserves we didn't know we had. Meanwhile, reports from the Siyaphumelela universities attest to the resilience of both our students and our staff, and the ingenuity and the care evident in the responses to COVID-19. The upside of having to have this conference virtually is that we have wider participation from across the country and from outside it. Nearly 250 participants have registered for the conference, and we had acceptance from almost all the international speakers we approached, as virtual participation is so much easier than lengthy flights, jet lag, and a good slice of time. Unfortunately, we missed the social. I would like to extend a special welcome to colleagues from the Kresge Foundation, and obviously you, Bill Moses, joining us. Bill has, as Takalani has said, championed causes in South Africa for many years, with the emphasis in the last 10 years on university advancement and now on student success. Also, a special welcome to our colleagues from Achieving the Dream, who've got up especially early to be with us, whose support has been invaluable in these early stages of the network, with special mention of the support they provided to our wonderful new cadre of South African coaches. And of course, welcome to the Siyaphumelela members of the Siyaphumelela network. Here they all are. These are the partner institutions. These are the participant institutions. And then we have an associate University of Pretoria. Altogether, this is nearly half of the higher education sector. We're hoping that Sefako Makato Health Sciences University will join us shortly. And for those of you who are not members, we hope this conference will entice you to join. So what have we got in store for you? Well, in the slide, you'll see many of the buzzwords of Siyaphumelela: leadership, innovation, holistic, student voice, equitable, and some new ones: designing learning, approaching evaluation. And looking across the parallel sessions, there may be a new focus on student well-being, echoing the culture of care, which infused the AD Achieving the Dream conference. Now, on account of the tireless work of Alan Amory and his team, we have lined up for you 8 invited speakers. Professor Nthabiseng and Professor Shaun Harper will speak with you this evening. On Wednesday, Professor Ahmed Bauer will speak on designing systems for student success. And then there'll be a joint session by Laurie Flood and Bonita Brown, focusing on designing for success by incorporating the student voice. On Thursday, we have Laura Rendon on educating for wholeness, social justice, and liberation, followed by 2 sessions on improvement science by Paul Lemahieu and Patrice Dawkin-Jackson. And on Friday, we will end with Helen Beetham on a range of digital capabilities students need to thrive. We also have 7 partner presentations. These are for our partner universities. In some cases, they're going to be reflecting across their Siyaphumelela projects or highlighting one aspect. And in others, they're taking a particular perspective of their student success work. I think these look to be incredibly interesting. We have nearly 40 presentations in the concurrent sessions, demanding for the first time that we open a 4th parallel session. Siyaphumelela has come of age. To lighten this a little, we have some lighter sessions and social sessions, fun things on Wednesday afternoon and Thursday afternoon. You can join us in an interactive origami session, and as well in University of Pretoria's laptop orchestra session. Just to remind you, the morning sessions on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday will start at 9 o'clock, generally finishing at 12, but with a little difference. And then the remaining afternoon sessions will start at 1500 and finish at 1830, my goodness. I hope you read better than listening to me. Now, first of all, though, we do need to pray that we do not have load shedding. In addition to load shedding, there may be reasons where, through no fault of their own, presenters are not able to be with us. In that eventuality, please will you contact Craig. If you can't do it by email, he has provided a phone number as well, and the email might be because you no longer have any electricity. We considered whether or not we should try to swap sessions around, but decided that we won't. It'll cause too much problem. So what you'll see, if somebody is unable to present at a concurrent session, there'll be a slide saying that that's what's happening, and we invite you to go to another concurrent session and then come back to that session if that's where you want to be. So we'll try to keep you informed as much as possible. Please bear with us. We know that these things happen. I now turn in brief just to report on what Siyaphumelela has achieved since its launch in August last year. The Siyaphumelela concept rests on 2 components. Those 2 components are regional and national networks and services. We have made excellent progress on the services in this 10-month period. These are the ones which have been provided by Sadie and by Achieving the Dream. Coaching, 6 South African coaches at 9 universities are extremely active. We had a wonderful series led by Charles Shepherd and Elizabeth Boy on knowing your data. Each university, except one, had a webinar on using data ethically. We had a great session with Achieving the Dream, our variant, if you like, our conference variant of Achieving the Dream conference. And then finally, we had we have the ICAT session, which is the integrated tool for assessment, capacity assessment tool, which is still in process. We then have a lot of services that are offered by our partners. And so we have design thinking. We had an excellent session in that regard. In addition to that, we have had identifying at-risk students. We've had first-year experience collaboration. We have the biographical data questionnaire, and then finally a student success institutional framework. There are many more planned for the second half. We'll tell you more about those at the end of this conference. In the networks, we've been a little slower to start. For the regional sub-networks, we have a regional sub-network which is already going in the Free State, Northern Cape and Northwest. We have one in the Western Cape and one in KZN. Those are all off the ground. Eastern Cape and the Gauteng Limpopo area is still in process. Siyaphumelela has also given birth to work streams. From those of you who've been with us for a while know about some of these. In 2016, we established work streams in academic advising and another one in data. Both generated important outcomes. In academic advising, under the leadership of the University of the Free State, the concept has really taken hold in South Africa. Yesterday, I had the privilege of attending the ELETSA launching conference in a vibrant session involving contributions from 7 universities. This has been led, amazing leadership by the University of the Free State. We also have made great progress in the National Student Data Warehouse. This started off as the data work stream. It finally focused with this focus. And the warehouse will be open to all who wish to participate with different levels of access, depending on whether you're a researcher, an institution, or a member of DHET itself. It is delayed a little bit, which I'm sure many things are going to be delayed by this, which is the PAPIA Act. And we're negotiating that with University South Africa and with DHET. We're very proud that University South Africa has given their wholehearted support to the National Student Data Warehouse. And DHET now sees it as an initiative which they will be responsible for. But during Siyaphumelela 2, we have 3 new work streams that are proceeding. The first one is on first-year experience. And you will see that there is a great session. There's a long triple workshop tomorrow on the first-year experience. Mental health work stream, which I'm sure will thrive under UWC and WIT's leadership. And then finally one on student tracking. But as you're all aware, COVID-19 has underscored new challenges for all of us, and particularly for student success. I want to identify and highlight just 3. The one is the very rapid move to digital, and unfortunately, digital inequality. The second, mental health, has assumed greater importance. And then finally, we start to have what Nick Spall in the Sunday Times referred to as COVID kids, and we need to be working out how we can respond to that new challenge. Just to share with you some data, here is an excellent study that was conducted by Free State for DHET. It was looking at students' access to use and learning materials, but because it was in COVID, they gathered a great deal of information on students' digital access. And some of it was really interesting. nearly, or around 72% either have their own or have access to a desktop and a laptop, but 30% don't. But nearly all students have smartphones. But as we all know, smartphones have got some limitations. They are pretty small. Over 90% of students submitted in this very large sample submitted assignments online, and 75% actually accessed material online. Clearly, our students are getting much more digitally apt than before. But only 16% have Wi-Fi or fiber at home. So it's all about purchasing really expensive data and relying on the nasty towers of Vodacom, MTN, etc. Well, how did they conclude? So I think there were two really important conclusions. Higher education system, it's demonstrated its ability to embrace technology in a way that many of us who've been working in this field didn't ever imagine would be the case. And moreover, students do recognize the benefits. On the other hand, they do experience huge difficulties. And so our challenge is, how do we ensure to work towards a new, inclusive and optimal learning environment, taking into account all of these aspects: devices, electricity, places to study, and capacity development for both teachers and students. In the second one was something that was highlighted last week, which is a study on mental health. Now, we had already known this was a serious problem, but it's looking to be exacerbated. So this was a study done by DHET Higher Health, HSRC, and Science and Innovation. And they speak about the fact that they emphasize that on the Kessler-10 scale, over 65% of students had mild to severe scores of distress on the Kessler scale. Now, this kind of didn't surprise me, because we probably, all of us, have some kind of mild levels of distress. When you look more closely, over 50% of students, expressed moderate to severe distress, and just over 30% severe distress. Mental health is now a serious systemic issue requiring systematic interventions. The study reports by talking about how one should be influencing core curricula. So we are pleased that we already have a work stream in Siyaphumelela around mental health, and we will see how we can contribute from a Siyaphumelela perspective to this really extremely serious problem. And then finally, there's this issue of the COVID kids. So what do we expect? Our schooling system has been severely hit in this time. So one quite alarming study showed that if you compare grade 2 and grade 4, in grade 2 and grade 4 in some no-fee primary schools in the Eastern Cape and Limpopo, children learned 50 to 75% less in 2020 than in 2019. Now, DHET is aware of this and is promising to try to do something about it, but I'm sure some of the effects of this will be trickling through to our university system some 10 years from now. In the Sunday Times, Martin Gustafsson reported that there had been a 54% reduction in schooling last year. Now, he just spoke about in schooling. What we don't know is, what does this mean for learning outcomes at the different levels? Some people have argued that at the matric level, students are able to study independently, and maybe it will have very little. But in earlier grades, what are those effects? So I think all in all, looking at those three challenges and all the ones we already knew we had and against which we are making huge progress, we have still lots to do. I would now like to hand over to Bill Moses, and I will stop sharing. But I hope you all have I think we have a great program lined up, and I'm sure that you will benefit enormously from it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. And thank you, Takalani, and also to Alan, Fatima, and everyone at SADI for all the great work that you do to promote access and success, particularly student success, and the Siyaphumelela Network in South Africa. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Kresge Foundation, Sadie, and the Siyaphumelela Network to the Siyaphumelela Conference. And we are delighted to have you here, and we are excited about the speakers you're all going to see, and just couldn't be happier. This is actually the 7th Siyaphumelela Conference that we've held. I guess it's the 2nd one we've held virtually, but our work on student success goes back a decade. And in fact, one of our first speakers today, Nthabiseng Ogude, was there at the start of this work in North Carolina when she was among the first South Africans to visit Achieving the Dream so long ago. But you know, even when we started the Siyaphumelela movement 6 years ago, student success was seen as exotic and perhaps a bit naive and even quixotic. And today, though, South Africa is among a worldwide movement in promoting student success. And institutions around the world are saying not just that they should become student-centered, but that they should also begin to be student-ready rather than insisting solely that students be university-ready. As many of you know, Cheryl DeLoray, who is an alumnus of this program and this work, is now the VC at the University of Canterbury. She's working in her new location in New Zealand to promote student success, where the New Zealand government is now working actively to get more Maori and Pacific Islander students to graduate and to graduate on time. Of course, in South Africa, you're one of the leading nations in promoting student success and looking at ways in which you can make education more equitable. And we've seen the expansion of the Siyaphumelela Network, as Jenny said, in the last year. In the United States, we've been looking at this work for a decade with a number of foundations and universities and university systems and policymakers. But I think the combination of COVID-19, long-term trends, and in our case, a new government are beginning to have their impact. One of the things that may interest many of you is the creation of the new National Institute for Student Success at Georgia State University. And if you don't know Georgia State and its wonderful work, I'll be placing a link to in the chat on a book on it and also a short video that you may want to see. In addition, we've seen the University Innovation Alliance, which some of you are familiar with, expand. This is a network of public institutions in the United States that is trying to promote student success, and it is expanding, including adding its first historically Black college and university, and also adding the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which has been a real leader nationally in getting more people of color from underrepresented backgrounds into STEM and to becoming scientists and STEM graduates. Finally, I just need to tip my hat to our long-term partner here in South Africa and also in the United States, Achieving the Dream. Achieving the Dream was the beneficiary of a generous transformational gift from Mackenzie Scott, who is the new philanthropist who's been supporting many, many institutions in the United States over the last year or so in very surprising ways. And they recently received a $20 million gift, which we think will really put them in a whole new capacity to serve students in the institutions that we're trying to serve in the United States. I just want to quickly preview a couple of the speakers. We're about to hear from, in a couple of minutes, so we'll be hearing from Shaun Harper, who's a professor at USC in the Race and Equity Center. He'll be talking about critical race analysis of Black undergraduate students in an urban university. Shaun is an old friend of Kresge and also of South Africa. He's visited this conference in person in Durban a few years ago, and he takes a really wonderful look at how you can improve equitable outcomes and look at things from an asset-based perspective, particularly for Black students and Black men and men of color. In a couple of days, we'll be hearing from Laura Rendon, Emerita Professor of the University of Texas in San Antonio. She'll be looking at sente pensante pedagogy, which is the idea of uniting both feeling and thinking. And I think she's new to us, and I'm excited to hear from her. Paul LeMahieu, who's at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Carnegie has been a long-term grantee, and many of you may remember a couple of years ago visiting Carnegie and learning about some of their work. They've been developing, they developed new mathways, Carnegie Math Pathways, which is a really critical part of the developmental reform movement in the United States, which is spread across several states in the United States and to the University of the Free State, I believe. And then we have Patrice Dawkins-Jackson, also from the Carnegie Foundation. Paul is going to be talking about network improvement communities and what they are, why they're valuable, and how you might establish one. And then Patrice Dawkins-Jackson, also from Carnegie, is going to be talking about improvement science and design-based implementation research and how we all have something in common. So I just want to wish all of you best wishes for a successful conference and on learning how to enhance student success on your own campuses. I hope we will be seeing you, God willing, in February in Portland at DREAM. And I certainly hope at the Siyaphumelela conference in Johannesburg a year from now. So thank you so much and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill. We now move on to our keynote presentations for the day. And we are very privileged to have two excellent speakers this afternoon, Professor Ogude and Professor Shaun Harper. Each will be addressing us for about 30 minutes. We will then have a discussion led by your questions and including your comments as appropriate. So Professor Ogude is going to go first and then followed by Professor Shaun Harper, who I see has joined us. Welcome, Professor. Welcome, Professor Ogude as well. We are all in webinar mode. The chat and the Q&A are enabled. Please post any questions that occur to you as we go in the Q&A, or you can wait for the opportunity during the discussion time to raise your hand and ask your questions orally, and you will be recognized probably by Fatima, who will bring you into the conversation. So we have these two addresses now and then the discussion of both presentations subsequently. So I would like now to introduce Professor Nthabiseng Ogude. Many of us are familiar with Nthabiseng. She is a seasoned strategic leader in higher education, starting as a science educator. She is a leading proponent of the focus on student success. And as we will see now, she's demonstrating a wider role for universities in our society. So with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Professor Ogude.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And good morning to all colleagues from the US, and good afternoon to my South African colleagues. I'm going to share a screen here. Is that showing, Jenny?
Yes, you can put it onto slideshow so we can see it more beautifully.
Okay, there we go. Is that fine?
Perfect.
Okay, once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to give a keynote presentation at this Siyaphumelela conference. And I've titled my talk, Reimagining the Link Between Basic and Higher Education for Student Success. Many of us who have been in student success, as many in the in the group of the delegates here would know that we've been working quite a bit with basic education. But I'm arguing for a different reimagination of that link, and I will show you how. I have a few framing points here to frame my discussion. And most of these are obvious, but I think they need some kind of a reinforcement. The first one is our education system still faces many systemic impediments. This is despite the notable achievements post 1994. The second one is, we do know that successful graduates start with a solid foundation from early childhood to university. Most of us in this group would have the fortune of taking our children to early childhood, development, and we know that that actually gives them a head start. So in our country, that is still a privilege, and that has to really make us think very hard. The third issue is the poor performance of our educational system is not something that is a secret, and there are compounded problems that manifest in dropouts in university and poor university performance. Now, let me talk about the performance of our education system. And these are figures that are well known. But if you look at 2017, I'm not going to talk about the pass rate. What I want to emphasize on is, if you think of about 1 million children actually started in grade 1, that started in grade 1 and actually finished in 2017, only 39.25% of those children actually registered for matric. And the group that we deal with in universities is a proportion, a very, very small proportion of the students that started in grade 1. Now, that particular kind of attrition along the educational system is actually very worrying. A similar trend is there for 2019. It's 38.9%. I won't, and then for 20, the same was, it was the same for 2020, although, the pass rate, if you wish, was 44.1%. But there are fewer children taking mathematics, fewer taking accounting, and so on. So we have a very serious problem with the education system. And as if we did not have enough, because what I'm talking about is pre-COVID-19, as if we didn't have enough, we had COVID-19 amplifying all the disparities and highlighting the possibility of further marginalization of certain socioeconomic group. And at the same time, we are grappling with being part of the global global movement. We need to catch up in terms of 4IR and so on. So what are we going to do, in this kind of context? So the rationale for my paper is that the sustainability of student success programs at universities is dependent on correcting educational pipeline problems. We need to look at the whole ecosystem. I mean, if you think of what, some of the figures that, Jenny quoted, at the beginning there, if very little learning happened, in 2020, which we know is actually true, how will that actually manifest in student success programs at universities, in times to come? So my argument is adopting an anchor mission and associate strategies can go a long way to address the above challenges. So what is an anchor mission? An anchor mission is the intentional deployment of an institution's geographically bound assets, academic capital, and economic power to try and revitalize the area in which the institution is located. Now, here are some of the attributes of an anchor mission. It's got to be a hyper-local engagement, community engagement. In South Africa, we're very experienced in terms of community engagement, but our efforts are so dispersed that we are unable to actually measure our impact. So in terms of UP, we chose Hatfield and Mamelodi, and we are collaborating with the University of Rutgers Newark, and we are funded by the Kresge Foundation. Thank you, Bill. Now you have to focus on a particular niche area. When we focused on broadening academic pathways for tertiary attainment, and I'm now going to talk about Mamelodi only. So this had to do with, we're doing good work in student success initiatives at undergraduate level, at UP and everywhere else, as is evident, in their Siyaphumelela work. But in terms of UP, the argument was how can we actually reinforce some of those? So I was part of, the student success initiatives when they started in UP. And in some ways, I feel responsible that I should make sure that student success continues at undergraduate level. So I feel that backward articulation is very important. We shouldn't just wait until the children arrive at first year, but we should actually have pre-university interventions, and this is what I'm focusing on now. In an anchor mission, you have a number of stakeholders, and we normally have collaboratives. In Mamelodi, we had a Mamelodi collaborative. Although one works in a hyper-local manner, there's always the opportunity to scale up projects. And I will talk about how we would like to scale up the University of Pretoria Pre-University Academy from 2022. Now, here is what we did in Mamelodi. This broadening the educational pathways. We looked at ECDs, primary schools, high schools, and many of us have worked a lot with the high schools. Those of us who have worked at the high school university interface, and we've worked a lot with ECPs and so on. But I want to show you exactly how we decided to do that in the Mamelodi Collaborative. We formed three networks, the ECD one, the primary school one, and the high school one. My apologies. And the high school tertiary interface one. So in the ECD network, we have academic staff, undergraduate and postgraduate staff, ECD teachers that are in Mamelodi, government departments, funders, international partners, and so on. The same is in the primary school network, but we also have clinics that are located in Mamelodi, psychology clinic and the occupational therapy clinic. The one is run by the Faculty of Humanities, the other by Health Sciences. And at the high school tertiary interface, we have all the above 20 schools, TVET colleges, and so on. Now, the umbrella organization, we call the Mamelodi Collaborative. So what do these networks actually do? They do a number of multi-scalar and transdisciplinary projects, all addressing educational pipeline problems within that locality of Mamelodi. For example, just before COVID, we had 10 postgraduate students in different disciplines, almost 70 undergraduate students embedded in their coursework. This is embedded community work, or it's voluntary, and several other people involved, including fellows. So all working on the educational ecosystem. What kind of projects? If I take the ECD network, for example, most of you are aware that we do extended programs at Mamelodi. So when our business management students were doing an assignment on business plans, they did not do that in a vacuum. They developed real business plans for the ECDs in that community. So there's lots of lateral thinking that has to happen here. And then, for example, we have a food garden, which is run by Department of Plant Sciences and the Business Clinic. Our Department of Architecture was looking at spatial constraints in ECDs with a long-term view to planning quality spaces. And we had health sciences, the students looking at health assessments of the children. And we all know that ECDs are very informal in the township. And we had the Faculty of Education having a look at how they could assist those ECD providers. Now, this is a complicated diagram, but it shows the number of partners in each, of these of these networks. I will not dwell on this, but it shows that for each of these, there are partners, including international partners. Now, all those networks are developing to different extents, but you know, all of you will know that I'm not an expert in any of those areas in ECD or primary school education. I have been working a lot in the high school university interface. So my main work has been in the high school interface, and we started a pre-university academy there. And there's very little that is new in terms of working with high schools, but we had a very hard look at what all the other NGOs and everybody else has been doing. And I think I can confidently say that the focus is really to try and get the children through the NSC. Their problem is not what happens post the passing of the NSC. They are just interested, and the irony is, as parents and myself included, all we want to know is that the child got a distinction. So the work that NGOs are doing is necessary, is important, but there's very little conceptual learning that happens there that actually assists in student success at universities. We still have to undo a lot of what is done, even with students that are actually good performers. We have been trying to increase our AP scores, you know, at a very alarming rate, which is something I'm not in favor of, but that has been to cope with trying to get the better students. Now, in terms of the academy, we have 1,000 students from grade 8 to the first year of university, 20,000 together with our partners, approximately 54% of them female. This was disrupted, of course, during COVID, so I can talk about that and what we did after that. Here are the 3 pillars: teacher professional development, post-secondary school readiness and awareness, and engendering scientific literacy. Now, I'm going to focus mostly on just readiness. We do mathematics, physical sciences, computer literacy, creative writing, and language. And one of the things you'd really, I don't know whether you'll be surprised or not, but it kind of shocked me is you want to recruit the teachers that are teaching at university, that are teaching at the schools. But you actually, you know, interview them and you get a shock. And you don't want to actually, you know, employ them. So we went through a 2-stage process where, you know, these are the teachers in the schools, these are the people that, and you can't work with them yourself. So those that we worked with, also you have to take them, you know, through very rigorous professional development and the commitment. They feel that maybe you are fussing too much. Why don't we practice? Why don't we practice the chemistry, you know, and the maths, you know, previous papers and all that, and you know, so it's really disconcerting to see what actually goes on. I talked of anchor institutions. I think we really as universities have to open our universities to you know, those that can, to our facilities, to the children. So this is their children using. In fact, our facilities now that we are online are being used by the children more than the university students. We have other programs, a homework program. We use postgraduate students a lot. The BCom and BSc program students come and they teach these children, and they also gain in the process. This is just a picture to show the girls really do well. This is another program that we ran. There's a whole story around, you know, the girls in Mamelodi, you know, that were coming for these programs. They'd never ridden a bike before, but the issue was to try and teach them physics concepts. And then we did mathematics modeling for girls. And here is just a snapshot of the results. And here it will sound like I'm actually contradicting myself. One of the ways in which we differentiate ourselves is that the idea is not just to pass the NSC, but passing the NSC is important. The biggest and most difficult point to drive to the parents and the learners, and I'm not trying to say that it's an easy concept for me also, is that if children understand, they will pass. So let us, make sure that the children understand and not drill them to produce an answer that you're looking for. So here are some of the results that we got pre-COVID. These are the ones in physical sciences. And basically, it was actually amazing that you could get a child getting 98% in mathematics and 100% in physical science. So there's a lot of potential there. The numbers are small, but I think we've got to stop running after numbers to say we have so many distinctions, and the work of student success at universities is just piling up and piling up and piling up, and the throughput is becoming a problem. From 2022, we would like to expand the pre-university academy, and we'll have it on 3 campuses. There'll be more offering stakeholders and schools. It's not part of this presentation, but if there are questions, I can answer those. Now, here are a few learner narratives. There were, some of them were very frank. I came for friends, food, education, and feeling like being at university. Food is central to learning. So we had to make sure that we give them good nutrition. After the first lessons, my mother was happy because here, unlike other programs, there was interaction. So coming from a child who says there was interaction, I haven't put one of the quotes that we got here, but this child actually said when he went back at school, actually the teacher would actually not choose him if he raises his hand, because he knew just too much. He was ahead of the whole class every time. And we realized that we need to address this somehow. There is our data analytics platform. I'm not going to go through it, but we have a teacher dashboard, an academic dashboard. This is integrated with the extended programs, by the way. And we also have a principal's dashboard and so on, but we are very data driven. I haven't shown, Bonza Majosi will be making a presentation on our data analytics platform. I'm going to stop here, Jenny. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and Nthabiseng, for your presentation. It's truly inspiring to see what a university can do about sharing its assets. And I think it gives us all a challenge to think about what assets we have that could be more widely and possibly quite relatively easily shared with others. But yes, taking some definite effort and vision on your behalf. So thank you very much indeed. We're now going to move to Professor Harper. Already Bill has made some comments about Professor Harper. Shaun, great to see you again after 2016, I think it was, when you were with us. Rather different circumstances beside the sea, but here we are. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. He's professor at the University of Southern California, president of the American Educational Association, with over 100 peer-reviewed papers. His research focused primarily on racial and gender equity and inclusion in educational, corporate, and organizational context. He has a special emphasis on Black and Latino male student success, which is something that is very concerning for us in South Africa as we watch the widening gap between young women and young men in many of the groups in South Africa. Over to you, Shaun.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And thank you all for having me back. I so desperately wish that I were there with you in person. We had such a great experience together a few years ago in Durban. I can't wait to reconnect with you in person in Johannesburg, hopefully next summer. But we will make the most of our time together here today. Let me also take a moment to thank Alan Armory for being my point of contact and the person who officially invited me. And an extra special thanks to Bill Moses and Caroline Altman Smith for facilitating the introduction between us and me and you several years ago. Certainly, I've very much enjoyed nurturing that relationship with you all over the years. I am so happy to spend this 30 minutes or so talking with you about advancing racial equity and Black student success. I'm going to use a US example, but I really thought about this very much in a global context. So you'll hear me talk about not only work that we've done here in the US, but in other parts of the world that have very much informed my perspective on how we succeed for Black students. Notice how I said how we succeed, not how they succeed, right? I am going in this talk to hopefully help us shift the onus and assume more of the responsibility for Black student success there in South African universities, as well as help us think strategically about racial equity. As you saw in the title, I'm going to anchor our talk in a case study that I had the pleasure of conducting and publishing with my colleague, Charles Davis, who's now a professor at the University of Michigan, and Ed Smith, who at the time was my doctoral advisee at the University of Pennsylvania. He's now Bill and Caroline's colleague at the Kresge Foundation. He's a program officer there. Ed, Charles, and I were called by a university here in the US to protect the identity of the institution. We gave them a pseudonym. Cityville is the pseudonym that we use in the paper that we ultimately published. The administrators at Cityville very desperately reached out to us because, in their words, they were having a crisis as it pertained to racial inequities and specifically Black student success. On just about every statistical metric of educational progress and performance at the university, Black students were at the very, very bottom. And it had been that way for many years. And when they disaggregated the data by gender, Black men, Black undergraduate men, were even further at the bottom. So Cityville, very well-intendedly, constructed a Black student success task force. That task force was largely comprised of administrators and faculty members at the university. There was one student member on the task force. So the task force, again, their intentions were good. They began by looking at the data. Those data that I just told you that, consistently showed that Black students were at the very, very bottom. But the task force didn't understand the contextual factors that were reproducing those very durable inequities from year to year. So they called our team to come to the campus to spend a few days doing interviews with task force members, but more importantly, doing interviews with Black undergraduate students. In those interviews, we were asking a very different set of questions than the task force members were asking in their work. We were trying to have Black students explain to us, what were the institutional cultures, conditions, and factors that were so routinely reproducing racial inequity. Interestingly, the set of factors they named and noted were so different from the analyses that the task force members had arrived at. You see, the task force had determined that it was all attributable to the high schools from which Black students graduated. In other words, the task force members and other faculty members and administrators at Cityville had determined that if only the high schools had better prepared these students for the rigors of university level work, they'd be doing better. They'd also determined that it was a matter of student engagement and student effort, that if only the students worked harder, if only they were more motivated, if only they had a growth mindset, they would have better performance outcomes. When the task force looked at completion and 6-year graduation rates, those were pathetically low. They were single digit, as a matter of fact, for Black students. They had determined if only Black students worked harder to graduate, they would graduate in higher numbers. In our interviews with the students themselves, they talked with us about classroom experiences they had that were extremely debilitating. They talked about their encounters with what we call classroom racism and racism in other parts of the university. They talked about the campus racial climate and how that climate was oftentimes hostile and toxic for Black students. They talked about, how Cityville for many, many, many years recruited their Black students only from one neighborhood in that particular city where the university was located, and how that neighborhood was way on the other side of town, and how Black students, in comparison to their white peers and their classmates from other racial and ethnic groups, Black students had significantly longer commutes, and that, Cityville is located in a place that snows a lot. So, on some days, it was just really hard for them to take a train and 2 buses to get to campus because of the climate, literally the climate, right? Because of the snow and so on. So what I'm saying to you, colleagues, is that I understand that many institutions all around the world really care about equity broadly, and in some instances, racial equity specifically, and that, many of us put together task forces and we rely on data. But what I'm arguing to you, as was our discovery in this case study at Cityville, that sometimes our reliance on only particular forms of data lead us to incomplete understandings or misunderstandings about Black student success and about racial inequity. This work that we did at Cityville really builds on, a set of methods that we've employed over the decade-long existence of the Race and Equity Center, certainly when it was at Penn, and we continue to do that work here at USC. But also, it builds on methods that I've been employing now for nearly 2 decades in my work as a faculty member. We do lots of campus racial climate assessments at colleges and universities here in the US, and we've done those in a few instances in other countries. Panama, for example, is one place. We're about to do some qualitative work on campus climates in the UK. But the point here, right, is that in our campus racial climate assessments, we actually interview students and talk with students to better understand, things that, our sort of traditional forms of data don't often reveal for us. What we hear from students really give us the explanatory undercurrents for those quantitative data that we often see. As you might imagine, given the global movement for Black lives, not just in 2020, but really over the past several years following the murder first of Trayvon Martin, but certainly we've seen an acceleration of the movement following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor here in the US, and uprisings here all across the country and indeed around the world. I need not tell you that we've seen an uptick in student protests, student activism, and uprisings at universities there in South Africa. But over the past few years, given the increasing movement for Black lives, that global movement and the protests that have ensued, So many universities have come knocking at our door, chancellors, vice chancellors, presidents, and other senior leaders to come and do the kind of work that we did at Cityville, or to come and spend a few days doing campus racial climate assessments. That work has become, and the demand has become quite overwhelming for our center. So what we did is we took the nearly 20 years of research that I've conducted and the 10 years of research that we've conducted as a center, and we used it to inform the development of a tool that now allows us to be much more useful to a wider set of universities here in the US. Eventually, we will take this tool and make it global, but let me introduce you to it through this 30-second, actually it's more like 45-second video. Here it goes.
The National Assessment of Collegiate Campus Climates, also known as the NAC, is a quantitative survey that will be administered annually at hundreds of participating colleges and universities across the United States. Through the NAC, thousands, perhaps millions, of college students will offer useful insights into the realities and complexities of race in higher education. NAC respondents will help us understand how various populations differently experience the colleges and universities they attend, where and what they learn about race, their feelings of preparedness for citizenship in a racially diverse democracy after college, and how racial issues in our broader society affect interactions and experiences on campuses. The USC Race and Equity Center will help institutional leaders use NAC survey results to improve racial climates, college experiences, and student outcomes.
Okay, you may have noticed that my colleague from the center was talking in future tense about the NAC, the National Assessment of Collegiate Campus Climates. We have since launched the national survey here in the US, and we launched it in February 2019. It has since been administered to more than 2 million undergraduate students here at universities and colleges in the US. Not just Black students, not just students of color, but also to white students. And it has allowed us to furnish data to those universities about the challenges and opportunities they have to improve student success by better understanding the climate. You know, I mentioned before that equity is on trend globally, right? Let me talk quickly here, though, about what our work has revealed for us, not the campus climate work and the survey work, but more so our work with institutions and with their leaders. One of the things that our work has revealed for us is a set of typical approaches to equity here in the US and in other nations. The first is that many institutions, as I mentioned before, attempt to advance and achieve equity without data on campus racial climates. I am going to say to you one more time here that our understandings of student success, broadly, Black student success specifically, and racial equity are going to be incomplete if we don't have deeper, more complex understandings of the experiential realities of students and how those experiences may differ and vary by racial and ethnic groups. But again, many campuses that have constructed task forces on racial equity tend to come to the table and do their work without data on the climate. They also come to the table with imprecise notions of equity. Part of the trendiness, the global trendiness of equity, is that it's often broad, right? You could ask 5 members of the equity task force, what does the task force mean by equity? And you're going to get 5 very different interpretations. Or you can ask a set of faculty members in an academic school or college, right? You know, what does the campus, what does the university mean by equity? And there's just going to be a wide-ranging set of articulations. So I think we have to be much more clear about what we mean by what kind of equity. Is it gender equity that we're working on right now? Is it equity for lower income students, right? Is it socioeconomic equity? Or is it racial equity that we are attempting to advance in this particular effort? There's a funny thing that happens in task force meetings or meetings of commissions at universities that have been commissioned to do equity work. There oftentimes is no deliberate or explicit discussion of race or racism in those meetings. We do a thing here where sometimes we will spend a year ethnographically observing a equity task force at a university, where we'll go to their meetings, which normally occur once a month. They're normally 2-hour meetings at most places. So there's a well-intended group of very smart people, faculty members, staff members, and institutional leaders who get together for 2 hours a month over an academic school year. So, 9 months. So that's 18 hours. So we'll go to their once a month meetings as participant observers and just simply take notes on how the task force is talking about equity and how they're doing their equity work. It might shock you that very smart people will spend 2 hours of their time every month working on equity, but say not a word about race, right? Month after month in our field notes, we're just waiting. When are they going to talk about race? When are they going to talk about racism? The data very clearly show that there are racial inequities. In fact, it's the racial inequities that brought the group to the table, but yet they're very skillfully talking around race. They're avoiding talking specifically and explicitly about race. Well, then it ought not surprise you that the very smart equity task force that spent 18 hours of its time over an academic school year produces a report to the vice chancellor or to, the senior leadership team that says nothing about race. We do a thing that admittedly is not our most rigorous research method, where we take a PDF of an equity task force report and we simply do a Control F, on our computer. And in the upper right-hand corner, in the Find window, we type in the words race, racial, racist, racism, Black, African American, Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, Asian American, so on and so forth. Surprisingly, time after time after time, those search efforts yield no results. Literally, a PDF that's sometimes like 80 pages says nothing about race, but yet it's the equity report. It was the racial inequities that brought us to the task. Now, where we do see the names of the various racial and ethnic groups is typically in the data tables. The data tables that are either sprinkled throughout the report or that are included as appendices to the report. Those data tables show us differences between Black students and, other racial and ethnic groups, right? But yet the actual narrative of the report says nothing about Black students. There's a data table that shows us that Black women are most disadvantaged on a particular educational outcome. There is a whole recommendation in the report on how to improve student success on that particular outcome, but it doesn't say anything at all about Black women, the group that the data table in the appendix shows us is most underserved. It's that racelessness that, again, helps explain, at least in part, why we do not succeed on improving outcomes for Black students year after year after year. It's because we're attempting to do it in a raceless way. That is not a thing that is unique to the United States. Again, it's a thing that I've seen in other countries in our work around the globe. Let me go a little bit faster so I can get us to some recommendations and we can, I can turn this back over for some discussion. again, a very well-intended equity task force focuses almost entirely on student deficits, like they were doing at Cityville. It was all about what the students don't have, what the students aren't doing, what others failed to do to prepare them for the university, without paying attention to faculty practices and leadership practices and institutional conditions that are reproducing and reinforcing racial inequity. Too little emphasis on classroom racism. So that equity task force report, even with this racelessness, it usually has some good recommendations in it. But those recommendations are almost always about things outside of the classroom, these compensatory resources and programs that are good and important, but they don't address the one space that every student has to go. That is class. Every student at every university has to go to class, right? Because of faculty power in many instances, and this notion of academic freedom, the academic freedom of the faculty. Look, I'm a faculty member. I enjoy my academic freedom. I don't want to be a hypocrite on this, but because of, you know, the power that we give faculty members like me, the task force, you know, often presumes that, well, the faculty is untouchable. The curriculum is untouchable. So let us do all of these other sort of around the edges, you know, kinds of correctives to attempt to achieve racial equity. But yet the classroom is the most violent site of racial inequity. All right, two more. Too little emphasis on workplace racism. What I mean by that is, yes, we're focusing on students and how to manufacture student success, but yet we're not paying attention to the people who are entrusted to do that, the workers at the university, the faculty and staff. Sometimes, in fact, oftentimes, my work reveals there are racial tensions between the actual workers, between faculty members and staff members and leaders across racial and ethnic groups, but yet they're supposed to somehow harmoniously work together on improving and advancing racial equity for students. I don't think so until and unless we can do something about, reducing those and eliminating those tensions between them. Yeah, we're going nowhere fast, I'm afraid, on those sets of professionals improving equity. All right, lastly, there's no remediation of racial illiteracy. The truth is, and this is not just a thing here in the US, I suspect the same thing is true there in South Africa. Many of us learned very little, in some instances, nothing at all in our own schooling experiences and university experiences and postgraduate experiences. Many of us learned very little about race and how to actually achieve and advance racial equity. So no wonder, even the people on the equity task force, their hearts and minds are in the right place, but they don't have the literacy. They don't have the skill. Why do they not have it? Because they never learned it anywhere in their own educational or professional upbringing. But not just them, really everybody else who works at the university, in most contexts, never really had a proper course of study on how to functionally and practically do racial equity. So in the final minutes here, let me just tell you just a few actions that racial equity requires and what it requires if indeed we are going to succeed in improving Black student success globally. First is that we have to specify that it's racial equity that we're working on and talking about, not at the expense of socioeconomic equity, not at the exclusion of gender equity. I'm not saying that we ought not care about those things, but if it is indeed Black student success that we're trying to improve, we have to be, very disciplined and focused in that effort and say that at least in this effort at this time, these universities are working specifically on racial equity as we attempt to improve success for Black students. We have to invest in the reparation of historical negligence, inequity, and harm Apartheid, for example, reproduced lots of inequity, right? It would be a mistake to presume that suddenly in a post-apartheid era that, you know, all of the damage and harm that was done during that time has suddenly gone away. No, the vestiges of it still remain. So we have to invest in reparations, in institutional reparations, right? Institutions, you know, deciding that we are going to commit resources specifically to improving, you know, the experiences of those who were most harmed by apartheid here in South Africa and by other ongoing, you know, contemporary and historical, systems that have, you know, reproduced racial inequity. Third, our actions have to be strategic. So many well-intended universities around the world that are grappling with Black student success and inequities just randomly start programs, or, you know, they'll invest a few dollars into, you know, some initiative that isn't connected to a strategy. The university has to have a Black student success strategy with high levels of intentionality on how we are going to improve Black student success, not just outside the classroom, but also inside the classroom, how we're going to reculture the institution to produce equity. A couple more. Students succeed when they see themselves in the curriculum, when their cultural histories, cultural identities, and cultural interests are represented in the curriculum, when the curriculum is a site of affirmation for them. They are more likely to succeed, right? So we have to map curricularly, where is it that Black students learn about themselves? And how can we integrate that across the curriculum so that it isn't just over here, just in sociology or in, you know, only certain courses, but how do we ensure that across the curriculum at our university, Black students experience the curriculum as a site of belongingness and affirmation? Fifth, we have to assess the campus racial climate, and we have to make strategic use of the data that we collect through climate surveys or through interviews. It's not enough to simply assess the climate. You also have to do something about the data. I'm just about at time here. So what I'll do, I'll put a link in the chat when I'm done to this article that I wrote back in 2016, just shortly after meeting you, as a matter of fact, for the first time. I'll put a link in the chat, but it's about how a lot of institutions at that time in the US, but this is indeed a global phenomenon, a lot of institutions will invest in assessing the campus racial climate, but then ultimately do nothing with the results. Literally, those universities have paid to ignore racism on their campuses. Yeah, don't do that. If you actually want to improve Black student success, you have to make strategic use of the data that tell you where the challenges and opportunities are that undermine Black student success. You gotta analyze policies through the prism of racial equity and revise those policies and create new policies that indeed are going to accelerate the university's efforts to improve Black student success, specifically, and racial equity more broadly. You have to exchange deficit lenses for stock taking of faculty practices, right? Instead of asking what's wrong with these students, you have to also ask, you know, what's wrong with the institution? What's wrong with our curriculum? What's wrong with our teaching practices insofar that they are reproducing year after year Black student inequity and failure and underachievement? You know, growth mindset is really popular. I like it. What I don't like, though, is one-sidedness. It's all about helping students adopt a growth mindset. What if we helped the faculty adopt a growth mindset as it pertains to Black student success? What if the faculty decided we can do better? We can grow in this particular area. We can help our university achieve a different level of outcome improvement from this year to the next year into the next. That we have to do that kind of reframing. Two more. There has to be accountability. There have to be consequences, and there has to be demonstrable progress on racial equity goals. It's not enough for leaders and for others at the university to say, equity is important to us. We really care about equity. Well, demonstrate it, right? There has to be, an expectation of demonstrable contribution to the university's racial equity goals. Last but not least, we have to engage in professional learning as it pertains to racial equity broadly and Black student success. We have to help faculty members, administrators, and workers and staff members at universities become more highly skilled. We have to help them develop their racial literacy. It's part of what we're doing here in the US. We have developed these two racial equity leadership alliances. One has 68 community colleges here across California. Another has 71 liberal arts colleges in every geographic region of the US. In fact, in 38 minutes, the Liberal Arts College Alliance will be meeting for its monthly professional learning experience. Every month in these two alliances, separately, we offer 3-hour professional learning experiences. Each month, there is a different racial equity topic. And, these are not sort of abstract theoretical topics. They're more so, much more so, 3-hour experiences where we teach faculty members and administrators and staff members from these colleges and universities in these respective alliances how to do racial equity, not just how to message it, not just how to message the value of its importance, but how to actually solve racial problems, how to actually make the curriculum culturally responsive, how to make classrooms, culturally affirming sites that produce equity. I am going to argue here, as I've done elsewhere, that this kind of model of bringing universities together and colleges together in our community college alliance and, upskilling, educators across them all at once is such an efficient model for teaching people, again, things that they never learned anywhere else in their educational and professional upbringing. I will stop here and just once again appreciate you for inviting me to be back with you. And again, I really hope that I'm able to see you again soon in person there in South Africa. Hey, thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much indeed, Shaun. I think a lot of what you've said resonates. A lot of us will be thinking that's exactly what happens in our institutions. Some of it is in a way entirely different, because I can think of a lot of our institutions which are, for example, entirely Black. All the students are Black. And so the equity issues are somewhat different equity issues, but I think we can try and think out of the box and then transpose what you've said into that sort of environment. So thank you very much for a fascinating and challenging contribution that you've made to our conference. So I would like to ask people either to comment on what either Nthabiseng or Shaun have said to us this afternoon, or to ask questions. And please, you can put up your hands if you have a question or a comment to make, and we can proceed from there. There's some things that are happening in the chat at the moment. Perhaps we could encourage people to also to speak on them. But let's start with the questions.
Okay.
Any questions?
Jenny, there's a question from our coach Delicia in the question and answer panel, and it's to Nthabiseng. Nthabiseng, could you please reflect on the level of participation of the University of Pretoria staff in the PUA, also in Hatfield campus, the demographic profile of the school children in the PUA? And you can see those questions in the panel. It's under the Answered tab. If you scroll down to the bottom.
Okay. So Nthabiseng, please could you reflect on the level of participation of UP staff? Also in the Hatfield comment, what is the demographic profile of the school children in there?
Okay, the one of the demographic is the easiest. I mean, for what we are doing in Mamelodi now, they are all exclusively Black children. But with the, with the scaling up of the PUA, we are now looking at schools in terms of quintiles, so that we don't lose, the disadvantaged, so that would be the answer, to that question. In terms of participation of academic staff, what happened with the University of Pretoria and Mamelodi is there were academic staff actually doing certain things in Mamelodi, but they were not coordinated. So the issue was really having some kind of framework around the work that we do, and the participation is, I would say, is good. The problem is the institutional. Okay, let me think. The institutional framework for working in a transdisciplinary mode like that one does not exist. So that has been one of the challenges that we've had. So it's not clear, we have, for example, we have an interfaculty academic committee, and this is where we discuss all these. But it's only the deputy deans that sit there, or the deans can allocate some of their junior staff depending on the level of enthusiasm for the project and so on. So there are challenges. I cannot pretend that the project runs very smoothly. But it needs a drive in terms of leadership.
Nthabiseng, could I just ask you about your interfaculty committee? Because it seems to me that you had really some amazing contributions from different faculties in your work. So how did that get set up, and yes, how does it operate?
Yes, the interfaculty committee was set up when we conceived the idea, when we thought about the anchor institution strategy. It was during the previous Vice Chancellor, Cheryl De La Rey. So she understood the strategy quite well. And it was actually formed as an equivalent of a faculty board. So we report to Senate. Our remit was approved, by Senate. But to be honest, there's different interpretations of whether there should be an interfaculty committee or not. But it's functioning well.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a couple of questions in the question and answer, just the last one that came up, so that we split them a little between people. And Naren Bajnath has a question which says, to Shaun, I agree with the interventions you propose. The question I have is whether these are enough to achieve the desired change. What is it about the institutions themselves that need to change in order to enduringly assure student success?
I really appreciate this question because one thing I forgot to say is that list of 9 actions those are 9 really good actions. They're actions that we've seen work really, really well. But those are not the only 9 things, right? Let's not treat those 9 actions as sort of a silver bullet or a correct all. What I will say, though, is that if in fact institutions were willing to commit to those 9 things, I can promise you that we will see the needle move in some measurable and sustainable ways as it pertains to racial equity. But I do think that there are other things that we have to pay attention to. For example, our hiring practices and ensuring that the racial makeup of the faculty and the leadership of the institution more closely matches the racial demographics of the student body at university. That's just one additional thing that immediately comes to mind. I'm sure that there are others. One thing I didn't talk about nearly enough because I was running out of time was, I think, point number 6, or I believe it was 6 or 7, around policy analysis. It's really important to make a list of every institutional policy, and then to go and actually collect those policies and have someone do a systematic analysis through the prism of racial equity, which is something that is oftentimes, hasn't ever been done. People weren't thinking of racial equity or the inequities that could be produced by a policy when they created it, long ago. So having, a group go and do a systematic analysis of all of the policies through the prism of racial equity will inevitably reveal some other sort of areas of institutional transformation that is required, or institutional vulnerabilities. That exercise, I think, will be, would be very instructive and useful. So those are just a couple things.
Well, thank you very much. There's another question in the question and answer, and it relates. Says Shaun, how do you decide who is Black? In South Africa, sometimes Black means anyone who's not solely of European descent, which could include people of Indian or Indonesian descent or people of mixed descent. And sometimes it means people of indigenous African descent.
Yeah, great question. We are certainly, in the work that we do here at the USC Race and Equity Center, we recognize that Blackness, gets defined differently in various parts of the world. So we attempt, with high levels of deliberation and intentionality, rather, not deliberation, but high levels of intentionality, to adapt our frameworks to be responsive to the context and the ways in which Blackness is defined, and more importantly, the way that Blackness is lived and experienced in that particular context. One thing that I know for sure is a global phenomenon, and we heard about this last year during the uprisings in the movement for Black lives around the globe. One thing I know for sure is a global phenomenon is anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness exists in the UK, in the US, and it absolutely exists in South Africa. So I think that, any effort that we engage in a global context, we want to understand how anti-Blackness is being experienced and by whom it is being experienced in that nation, as we, attempt to define what it is or who it is that we're, building the interventions to help succeed.
Thank you very much. Nthabiseng, there's a question here for you about the impact of COVID on your program. But it would also be interesting, you're operating on a campus of a university that was certainly predominantly enormously white. The Mamelodi campus was not. So perhaps you could also reflect a little on some of what Shaun has said and whether it impacts on the project that you have spoken to us about so inspiringly.
Yes, in terms of COVID, it really threw us off. I thought it was actually the end of our projects in Mamelodi, because I didn't see how we're going to succeed. But as we wrote our continuity plan for teaching and learning at the undergraduate level, I mean, we all went into some emergency mode where we developed continuity plans. Then I thought, you know, there's no reason why we shouldn't have a continuity plan for the pre-university activities, in the same way that we had for, you know, for the university activities. At that stage, really, it was just boldness more than anything else. And you know, the Deputy Vice Chancellor was very, very supportive. And he said, we'll make all our institutional platforms available for you. Just tell me exactly how we can do it. Now, with, you know, so I was continuously together with colleagues, not I all the time. We were continuously looking at what is happening at the university level, what can we, you know, piggyback on, what can we translate, and that's how we work really, you know, across this interface. You know, we are trying to undo what happens pre-university. So what is it that can be done, you know, pre-university? So even with COVID, it was the same. So we wrote a turnaround strategy. We had our data analytics person work with the education innovation people to look at how we could get a data-free platform. But the real problem became the devices. There we got totally stuck. The university was providing devices for, you know, for most of the students, and we didn't have a rationale for buying devices for students. And although there was funding that was now diverted, you know, from the day-to-day activities, we did not find a reasonable way in which you could buy devices for the children in the township. So our program was affected for you know, during the lockdown. Some children that could, you know, we had about I think maybe 40% of the children had devices or access to the devices, but we realized that having access means that they could be shared with 5 other people or something like that. So it was very sporadic, but we went online with all our courses, and now we are totally hybrid. And when the children can come to campus, we are no longer doing face-to-face learning at all, you know, very minimal. So that's a bit of a long, you know, explanation to what we did with COVID. But the bottom line is access to data and also devices. I've now forgotten the other part of the question, Jenny.
So it was just your context. So Shaun reminded us so powerfully about understanding the context in which everybody in the institution is actually working. Yours is a typically South African context, as a campus based in a black township, but of a white university, historically extremely conservative university. So I just wondered, what Shaun had to say, how that resonates, how that, how you think about it.
I've actually had a lot of internal debates, you know, about this one. I've always seen Mamelodi as an opportunity for the University of Pretoria to, you know, to actually demonstrate redress. I think it was very fortuitous that the campus actually got that that Vista campus through through the mergers. So personally, I believe that it provides the university, like I say, an opportunity, to really confront its past and where historically it comes from. It's a very muted discussion within the university, I must admit. Everybody is very sensitive about Mamelodi. They don't want to argue about, whether to work there or not. So it's a very polite discussion. We must all, work to Mamelodi and so on. But I really don't know deep down what people are thinking about the campus.
Perhaps I could just pick up on what you're saying, because there's another question that has come up. It's actually in the chat, but here it is. Shaun, it's to you. How do you go about breaking the silence of the race equity task forces, or whom you refer to? They've never addressed race yet. How do you change that?
This is great. I mentioned those professional learning alliances. The very first session in both alliances was, how do you talk about race? How do you lead and engage in productive conversations about race? We see that as fundamental to the work of racial equity. We are going nowhere fast on improving and advancing racial equity through the task force work, through the work of a faculty, through the work of a vice chancellor and a leadership team, or anybody, until and unless we actually learn how to break the silence around race and racism and racist institutional cultures, policies, practices, norms, and so on. So we literally teach people how to name those things, how to have those conversations in ways that are not explosive. A lot of people have a lot of anxiety about naming, race and racism specifically, because they are afraid that it's going to just, erupt in conflict. Our claim to fame here at the USC Race and Equity Center is that never once have we had a conversation that we were facilitating for a corporation, for a foundation, for a higher education or tertiary institution. Never once have we had a conversation about race go off the rails or otherwise be explosive or divisive. So we teach, those professionals all of the methods that we employ with tremendous success to ensure that outcome. So I think that that's what it requires.
And may we ask, is there a resource that you have developed that could assist us in this regard?
It's literally a whole 3-hour experience. I'd be happy to come back and do that experience with our colleagues from across the campuses there, the universities in South Africa. That would be great.
Is that something that you could do online, or is that too tough?
Oh, yeah. So one thing that I forgot to mention, this is a great question, Jenny. Throughout the pandemic, more than 54,000 professionals have been here in my home. I'm at home right now. I know that it looks like I'm in a broadcast studio somewhere, but I'm actually in a guest bedroom in my home. More than 54,000 professionals have been here in my home for live virtual professional learning experiences. That Liberal Arts Alliance that I just talked about, that's starting now in 16 minutes, there will be 600 faculty members and administrators from those 71 liberal arts colleges here in my home for that experience. So yes, Jenny, we've been doing so much of this, too much of it, virtually. But yes.
Thank you. We might take it up and take as one of the Siyaphumelela services. Would be great to have something. 3 hours is what you need.
Yes, please.
And you can have 600 at a time?
We could have up to 1,000 at a time in a highly engaging, interactive format that allows us to take advantage of live polling and breakout rooms and all of that. We don't talk endlessly at people for 3 hours. That would be torture. Instead, they're highly engaging, very interactive, and again, most importantly, practically useful experiences. Our goal always is to have people log off Zoom and immediately be able to implement what they've just learned in their practices at their institutions. So yeah, up to 1,000 people at once.
Fantastic, thank you. There is another question for you in the question and answer, and I think there's a hand as well, which Fatima will tell me about in a moment. So in the question, Shaun, a very inspirational presentation. Then, while the demographic profile of universities have changed rapidly with the advent of democratic government, inequities are still sustained through a plethora of outdated policies that disadvantage Black students. This is one of the strategies that you actually mentioned. How do we address this challenge effectively? So you've said to us it's something that we should do. We should also be looking at the curriculum. How do we address both of those issues? What are the practical steps that we can take?
I want to go back to my list of 9 and amplify.
These are on your 9.
Amplify points 3 and 4. Point 3 was around strategy and intentionality. Again, so many institutions around the globe have such weak and frankly very random, interventions that are supposed to, improve Black student success. It can't be random, right? There has to be a strategy that is as complex and as multidimensional as the university's finance strategy. The finance strategy isn't random. It typically is very detailed, very complex. If we are going to keep the lights on and, pay the employees here and so on and serve the students, we got to make sure we have enough money. And part of making sure we have enough money is to have, a finance strategy that doesn't go from month to month or even, just from one year to the next, but instead is a long-term, strategy. We have to bring that same level of multidimensionality and intentionality to our strategic racial equity efforts. And the point about curriculum, that curriculum mapping exercise that I talked about, where, we discover where is it in the curriculum that students' cultural histories, identities, and interests are affirmed? Where is it in the curriculum that, structural and systemic racism is taught and learned? The truth is, when we attempt to do stock taking of where that's happening, it reveals that it's happening in far too few places. Well, that is a useful discovery, right? That then helps us understand, where there is an opportunity to deepen, again, with higher levels of intentionality, teaching and learning around these topics. Yeah, I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Okay, great, thank you. Fatima, I think you said that there was a question, a live question.
Yeah, we have a very patient hand there. Emmanuel Makwashu.
Yes, thank you. Yes, no, I think patience is one of the virtues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have delayed you so long.
No,
if it's possible, could you put on your camera? But it may not be possible. Don't worry.
I don't see the camera. Anyway, I'll try. But let me start with Shaun. By the way, you look like my cousin. Anyway, yeah, Shaun, I'll start with you. You seem to be speaking in definitive terms, almost overconfident about South Africa and the race issues and how things are and so on and so forth. I think it's a little bit problematic, and I'll tell you why. And I want your opinion on this. If you compare the US and South Africa in terms of the majority around race, in the States, African Americans are much less than, in my view, right? That in itself should imply that race experiences, at least in 2021, in the US and South Africa, may probably not be that comparable to the extent that you're coming across. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that as those of us who've grown and lived in South Africa and worked in South Africa all our lives, we can, in almost categorical terms, say, not entirely, but to some degree, race as a category, right? Race as a category is beginning to lose ground, but what seems to be taking ground is coloniality, right? In other words, a mindset of the superiority of Euro-American worldviews, okay? Euro-American views, in my view, a virus that has affected Black, white, Indian, colored, and everything, right? So South Africa's discourse seems to have, and I'm not saying entirely, I'm trying to be very careful here. I'm not saying entirely race as a category has lost, attention. Certainly it hasn't. But we are beginning to realize that it is coloniality that we are actually dealing with. So there is that aspect. That aspect is that we are increasingly finding people of all races fighting coloniality. Black, white, Indian, Afrikaans, fighting coloniality, this sense of superiority of Europeanness and whiteness and Americanness. So we're beginning to see that. I'd just like to hear your views on this, because I think we may share more beyond this space where perhaps you can begin to perhaps modify your certainties about South Africa. So there is that. And then to Nthabiseng, there's a question around to what extent what you referred to in terms of matric and percentages of kids that eventually reach matric, to what extent has the decision to close teaching colleges, right? To what extent has that contributed into the problem that we have? I mean, if I'm looking at you and I'm looking at myself, I think both of us were taught by teachers who received their diplomas in teacher training colleges and not universities, right? And post-1994, the majors and colleges being closed and teaching and preparation of teachers shifting to universities, right? What was lost there in your view? And wouldn't you agree with me that perhaps part of the contribution is that, unobserved, uncritically engaged decision to simply shut colleges and say teachers need to be trained by universities? So to what extent, in your view, has this shift contributed into the problem that you are referring to now? We were all taught by teachers who graduated in teacher training colleges, and we are doing well, and suddenly that is no longer the case. So this is just anecdotal, but I would like to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'd just like to add to the question, and the first part of the question, you might not get to the second part, which is several comments in the chat are suggesting that we need to evolve this conversation towards notions of transformation and decolonization, and as the last speaker has just been talking, decoloniality, and including of the curriculum. So I think we can connect all of those together if you would like to attempt to answer.
So I'll go first, and I'll attempt to be succinct. To my cousin, you are exactly right. I appreciate your critique. I often speak with tremendous confidence and certainty about the data that I have from the places around the world in which I and other members of my team have done our work. The truth is, we actually have not done research in South Africa. I so desperately want to at universities there so that I can, with greater nuance, more deeply understand the particularities of how racism plays itself out there. I have a scary suspicion that racism continues to be a global phenomenon, and that South African universities are not, wholly exempt from it. But I do think that you are right that coloniality is too a global phenomenon that, perhaps inevitably, right, is affecting the culture there in South Africa and your universities. But it's my way of saying that, yes, I did speak with tremendous certainty with what I've learned from other places around the world, but I would like to more deeply understand those things with more nuance about how they played themselves out, similarly or differently there in South Africa. So I definitely appreciate the critique.
Thank you. One of the comments in the chat says that two things can be true at the same time. Coloniality as well as racial inequity still need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
So there we go. Right. I think there's time for, I don't know, Nthabiseng, do you want to add anything on that conversation?
Well, just very briefly about the teacher training colleges.
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, that question. I do not have any definitive answer on that. I know that teacher training colleges also had their own weaknesses. I think they could have been rationalized, but not totally, closed many of them down. Thank you.
I think that that's the case, indeed. There's certainly something needed to be done. What was done was perhaps not the best thing that could have been done. Okay, one sort of last question, a very practical one. What advice would you have for student advisors based at faculty level who are trying to advocate for equitable practice for the students they engage, but within an inequitable and largely untransformed institutional and faculty culture?
Sure.
So that's for both of you, although it was, it was also for Shaun, actually. She did say, a great presentation, both Nthabiseng and Shaun. My question is for Shaun. So there we go, we're putting you on the spot.
Could you repeat the question, Jenny?
Okay. What advice would you have for student advisors based at faculty level who are trying to advocate for equitable practice for the students they engage with within an inequitable and largely untransformed institutional and faculty culture?
Yeah, okay, got it. I want to go back to that case study that I shared. When we presented the data to the leadership of the institution and to the Black Student Success Task Force, almost everyone there, all of those faculty members and staff members and leaders said, this is the first time that we're ever hearing these examples, these stories, these narratives from students. They were not resistant at all, nor were they attempting to discredit. They just said that they had never heard. So I think for student advisors, it would be great if they could also be the spokespersons for those experiences as they are attempting to raise institutional consciousness about the existence of those experiences on behalf of students, so that the onus isn't always on students to repeatedly have to raise these issues, nor is the onus on, an external consultant or an external researcher, but instead they're these everyday professionals who have tremendous access to students and deep relationships with and trust with students, to be the trustworthy ambassadors of those experiences, I think could be very, very useful.
I don't think we have time, but I'm sure some members of the Eletsa launch from yesterday it was very much a theme of how they were talking. It was about academic advisors, but how they were talking resonates very much with what you have just said. So I think we're on a good track as far as that is concerned. Right, Shaun, you really have to go. Is there one last thing you need to say before, and then Nthabiseng, one last thing that you need to say? But Shaun, you can say something and then go, because we know you have to go. And thank you very much indeed for a very provocative and interesting conversation.
So here's a confession. Here's, Jenny, how I missed the question the first time. My team was frantically texting me, "Are you going to join?" There are more than 600 people who are waiting for the next presentation. I'm like, oh, but I'm still in South Africa right now. So no, the last thing that I'll say as I dash off is that I so appreciate the relationship that I've had the privilege of cultivating with you over these past several years. I look forward to deepening that relationship. And I also, as I said in response to the very reasonable critique, I look forward to learning so much more about universities in South Africa so that I can, hopefully be even more helpful to you with, examples and interventions and strategies that are, really right for your cultural context. But hey, I really appreciate having had this opportunity to be with you again.
Great, thank you very much indeed, and good luck with your seminar.
Okay,
thank you. Nthabiseng, last word from you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I think all that remains for me is to thank you for the opportunity, for Siyaphumelela. And some of the issues I raised may have appeared very complicated, but I recall when we started talking about student success. I think Bill talked about it many moons ago. I talked about it when we started talking about it some time ago. One would never have thought that would be where we are in terms of student success in South Africa. So I think we just need to be bold and start some of these initiatives. And for me, Siyaphumelela is an inspiration that we can change a lot in terms of our educational system. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And that resonates with something the keynote speaker said at Eletsa yesterday. She said she really likes working in South Africa because there seems to be a willingness to take on the big issues. So to you and to all my colleagues who have participated today, thank you very much indeed for the session. I think it's been a great beginning to Siyaphumelela's first virtual conference as opposed to launch. So thank you indeed.
Thank you, Jenny.
So I hope you all have a great evening and can come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock sharp for an interesting next session starting at that stage. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.